I'm going to introduce somebody who most of you know, I will assume. She is the CEO of this institution, and she has had a fabulous career as an innovator in and of her own right. She's the active member of Canada's innovation community who served on boards of private companies, industry associations, and research organizations, member of several government advisory panels, works way too hard. She's also got her PhD in chemistry from Oxford University, which she attended just a few short years ago as a Rhodes Scholar. In 2009, Dr. Trunick was inducted into the Women's Executive Network's Canada Most Powerful Women Top 100 Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, Ilse Trunick, CEO of MaRS.
Thanks very much, Ralph, and good morning, everyone. I have a simple task. My first task is to welcome all of you here today. We're absolutely delighted that you could join us for this Social Innovation Summit. It's quite an interesting mix of people, so I hope the conversations today will not only be challenging and stimulating, but that you will meet some really, really neat people. My second task is to introduce our next panel, which is a pretty unusual panel. It is very difficult to get three busy ministers on one stage at the same time. So that's the one thing that's unusual about it. But the second part of it is completely on target. And that is that all three of the ministers who will be up here today are social innovators in their own right. And secondly, if social innovation is actually going to make its way through the public service, it's going to be a team sport. And so we're absolutely delighted to see that this teamwork is underway. So let me then introduce our three ministers who will come up here. First, Laurel Broughton, who's the most seasoned of them all in the legislative assemblies. She was first elected in 2003, re-elected in 2007. She's currently the Minister of Children and Youth Services and the Minister responsible for women's issues and the poverty reduction strategy, which a role that she assumed in October 2009. Minister Broughton is known for getting stuff done. She pioneered the Domestic Violence Action Plan, the Child Pornography Reporting Act. As Minister of the Environment, she developed policies that really pioneered one of Canada's most comprehensive climate change plans, supporting business, creating jobs, but also setting very aggressive targets for greenhouse gas emission reductions. And she introduced the Clean Water Act. Before joining electoral politics, she was active in her community but had a very successful career practicing equity, commercial, and human rights law. Please welcome Laurel Broughton. Second, Dr. Eric Hoskins, who's the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration. He was first elected to the St. Paul's riding in Toronto in 2009 and has been Minister since 2010. Dr. Hoskins completed his medical studies at McMaster and Oxford before spending a decade in doing humanitarian work as a doctor in war-torn regions. Subsequently, he advised then Foreign Minister Lloyd Axworthy on many issues related to peacekeeping, child soldiers, and other regional conflicts. He co-founded an international charity called War Child Canada to help children in war-afflicted regions. He has received many awards for his work, including the Order of Canada and the United Nations Lester B. Pearson Peace Medal, and he was recognized as one of Canada's 5 leading activists by Time magazine. Welcome, Dr. Hoskins.
That's a good thing.
Finally, Minister Glenn Murray, the Minister of Research and Innovation. He assumed this portfolio in August last year. Minister Murray has a lifetime of activism in urban planning, sustainable development, and community health. He was a mayor of the city of Winnipeg, and during that tenure, he chaired the Big City Mayors Caucus, which was very effective in diverting a small portion of the federal gas tax to help municipalities with infrastructure renewal and construction. Minister Murray also was asked by the Prime Minister of the time to chair the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy. He became President and CEO of the Canadian Urban Institute prior to joining the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. He has also received many awards, including the Queen's Jubilee Medal, and for his work with international and national AIDS organizations, and his work in the Aboriginal community. He was given the highest honor of an eagle feather. Welcome, Minister Murray. Thank you very much.
I'm up first. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues, Ministers Murray and Hoskins, and to welcome you to Ontario's Social Innovation Summit. Building partnerships for social change really sums up why we are here today. The social changes we face today are so broad, so complex, that they demand an equally wide response in tackling them. And we're honored that so many of you are here today, bringing so many diverse interests, ideas, background, and expertise to the table. And that you share our belief that by working together, by building partnerships, we can better address the social changes that affect us all. The challenges are many: ensuring good health and education, a clean and healthy environment, social inclusion, and equal opportunity. In fact, it was through the development of the government's poverty reduction strategy that we fully recognized that we must be willing to tackle and explore creative solutions to complex issues, that we really recognize the vast potential of social innovation. We realize that we will not be able to solve poverty on our own, that we need an all-hands-on-deck approach. Poverty is an issue that affects all of us, whether it's the cost to our healthcare system, our justice system, lost tax revenue, or the opportunity cost of the lost potential of our kids. There are huge opportunities to be had from reaching out to new partners, engaging more individuals, and providing the necessary tools so that we may work together more effectively towards a common goal. Communities, governments, businesses, organizations, individuals, all leveraging their ideas and connections, resources, and skills into small and large projects of every kind can inspire tremendous results. Take, for example, the award-winning government-supported Pathways to Education. It was developed in response to one specific problem. Kids from Regent Park, here in Toronto, were dropping out of high school at an alarming rate. Concerned people talked to other concerned people, and they committed to tackle the problem, but not in the same old way. Instead, they set up a holistic pathway for the kids, a system that involved tutoring, mentoring, financial support, and advocacy, and a lot of partners who refused to let any one child slip through the cracks. 10 years later, the dropout rate in Regent Park is down by 75%. The kids are flocking to post-secondary education, leaving poverty behind, motivating and inspiring their peers, and the program is expanding across Canada. There are equally inspiring initiatives across Ontario, all vital and all making a difference. Yet, they are only the tip of the iceberg about what can be accomplished. And that is what's so exciting about today, because we're all here together to both recognize the pioneers who have been making a difference in our province, our country, and around the world, and begin to take the next steps forward, really harnessing the power of social innovation in Ontario. To be clear, while our government aims to help build a foundation that allows social innovation to flourish, this is not about offloading responsibilities. We'll always address Ontario's social needs as a priority, but we also understand that ever-evolving social challenges will require ever-evolving solutions. And just like business entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs have a unique ability to look at old problems and respond in new ways. Governments can learn from this. We all can. Take Eva's Phoenix Print Shop in Toronto. This enterprise provides hands-on training for homeless youth so that they can learn the printing business and find jobs, while using revenues to help more kids get off the street. Or Campbell's Canada, who recently launched Nourish, a complete and healthy meal in a can developed specifically to help alleviate hunger. Campbell's has already donated tens of thousands of cans to the Ontario Association of Food Banks, with whom they work to develop it. Poverty is just one social challenge, but there are many, often interrelated. Social innovation takes many forms and crosses every sector. It involves leveraging creativity and abilities, building new partnerships, thinking outside the box, and not being afraid of what is possible. But at its most basic level, I have to agree with the President of the European Commission, Jose Manuel Barroso, who said that social innovation is about meeting unmet social needs and improving social outcomes, or as Rick Young has just said, big change. It's that simple. It's about people wanting to make a difference, identifying a problem, and finding an innovative solution. People want to help other people. They want to build profitable businesses in meaningful ways. They want to do their part for an equal, inclusive society and a sustainable environment for their children, for their grandchildren. And they truly believe in the ambitious possibility that Rick set out. Yes, we need to look to other jurisdictions and experiences and learn from them. But Ontario is well positioned to be a leader in social innovation. We just have to look at the diverse talents, energies, achievements among those who are here today to know that we are well on our way. I want to leave you with one thought before I conclude. Glenn and Eric and I and all of you are here not because we have all the answers. We're here because together our ideas are greater, and together we can accomplish more. We're here because we recognize the value of all sectors and even greater value fostered by new partnerships. As government, we want to find ways to support social innovation and to support great ideas. And that is what today is all about, the possibility that awaits. So I now have 200 young girls waiting across the street for me to give another speech on women and politics. I wouldn't have thought that the events were so interconnected, but when we talk about the need to engage and bring forward new and young ideas, find ways to reach out and solve the problems of the future, I think it's quite appropriate that I'm rushing out of here to go across to talk to them. I'll be back to see you later today. I really look forward to some conversations, hearing everything, the possibilities that await all of us. Thank you so much for participating today.
Minister Hoskins.
All right? There. Well, this is probably, or very likely, the point in our conversation where you're thinking to yourself, boy, could I ever use another cup of coffee? But I'm very pleased to join my cabinet colleagues, Laurel and Glenn, at this first ever Social Innovation Summit. Now, have you heard the joke? 3 ministers walk into a bar. You know, if I go this, I better stop there probably. But I wanted to say that I am noticing the Twitter feed up there. We can see it from the stage. So whoever made the tweet, Broughton delivers great speech, expectations low for Hoskins. I can't wait to see what comes next. Bad jokes, probably. But I'm delighted that all of you were able to take the time this morning to be here for this important first of its kind summit discussing social innovation. My wife, Samantha Nutt, at the breakfast table this morning also said, she gave me a few ideas about what useful social innovation around the house might involve. And one was if I would take out the garbage without being asked. It'd be a good example of social innovation. But Sam's humor aside, as I was working on my speech this morning, I struggled a little bit to think of a good, concise definition of social innovation. It's hard to come up with a definition that encompasses, as we've already heard, the extraordinary breadth, not only of the work that our social innovators do each and every day, but of the exciting possibilities that social innovation presents. Ultimately, I kept coming back to the notion that we know it when we see it. We know what social innovation is when we see it. One of the greatest virtues of social innovation is its ability to defy the confines of any one definition, pushing boundaries, opening up new possibilities, making us think about problems in a new way. So we know it when we see it, or more likely, given the talent in this room, when we create it ourselves. After all, social innovation is something active. It could be a not-for-profit partnering with an entrepreneur to fill a previously unmet need. It could be a private sector company bringing an innovative idea to government and looking for support. It could be a social agency filling the spaces between the vertical silos that keep institutions apart. And certainly from my experience as a co-founder with my wife of War Child Canada and as a community physician on the Danforth, I saw people and agencies every day bringing innovative solutions to chronic social challenges. Now, whatever the case, I think we're all here today because we realize that social innovation is an absolutely indispensable tool, a tool with great potential. If you're a not-for-profit, chances are you've been into social innovation for some time now. And as many of you have told me, you really haven't had any choice, given that it seems there are always more demands than resources to meet those demands. And to be honest, government has been late to the party. But this summit today is an extraordinary step, and I think in particular it's a testament to my friend and colleague Glenn that we are here today and taking this step in the right direction. It's a sign that our government gets it, that our government and the individuals you're hearing from this morning is opening ourselves up to new ways of doing things, new relationships and new partnerships. And the goal for us over the long term, I think, is to feel our way towards a role where we're actually making more social innovation possible, as opposed to getting in the way. So I want to make two very brief points about social innovation this morning before hearing what you have to say. The first is that, from my experience, social innovation is driven by people and by communities. That is, it comes from the ground up. The best social innovation springs from the interactions and partnerships that we form every day. When we break down the silos and fill in the spaces, when we show flexibility and find new ways to work around challenges, we create value. To do that, we need to go outside, as was mentioned earlier, we need to go outside of our comfort zones on a regular basis. We need to reach out, connect, and collaborate without fear of failure, because we suffer when we work apart. The second point I want to make is related to the first. How can government support and foster social innovation without suffocating its organic and evolutionary and revolutionary nature? In my opinion, one of the best ways to keep the momentum going is by building a deeper and more collaborative relationship between government and our dynamic not-for-profit sector. That's the goal of my ministry's partnership project, and I want to thank many of you here today once again for participating in this wholesale review of the government's relationship with Ontario's not-for-profit sector. Some background on this. Ontario's not-for-profit sector is the third pillar of our economy, along with our public and private sectors. bigger than the auto and construction industries combined, with 1 million workers and 5 million volunteers. Its strength and influence are everywhere. But much of its potential to drive change in our economy and society remain untapped. So last year, Helen Burston and I began a dialogue aimed at getting the most for Ontarians out of our not-for-profit sector. For 6 months, we talked about finances and governance, collaboration and partnership, and respect and recognition. And we talked about a great deal: social innovation. It was an invaluable exercise. Now, we're ready to keep that momentum going. This spring, we issued a report on our consultations. It represents the McGuinty government's plan for improving our collaboration with the not-for-profit sector. And we are moving forward aggressively to implement the report's recommendations to build stronger partnerships and stronger communities in an environment where social innovation can thrive. In fact, you may know that one of the half-dozen recommendations deals specifically with social innovation and the role of government in facilitating social innovation and working to provide the financing tools like community bonds that are required. So my friends, social innovation is taking us literally into a new era. What began as a necessity brought on by limited resources and unlimited needs is now a virtue, opening up new possibilities for collaboration and change. And our job, yours and mine, is to find a way to bring government to the table, but not its red tape and bureaucracy. We're here today because Ontarians are looking for answers to some very challenging social issues. Social innovation can provide not only the answers, but new ways of solving old problems with people, not for people. So as we do our work today, let's keep the needs of these Ontarians front and center. Let's reach out, let's connect, and let's show the innovative and visionary leadership Ontarians are expecting from us. Thank you.
First, I just want to thank a few people. It's a real honor, and it's really fun working with Eric and Laurel, and I want to thank the Premier for asking us to do this. It's not often that you get to work in tight teams in a cabinet situation, so I want to tell you this is a rather unusual experience for us in cabinet, I think. And it's very much in the color and flavor of our Premier, who set up the only research and innovation ministry in the country to date, in creating what was intended to be the idea of innovation as a driver of change in government as a foundation. I want to talk a little bit about the process and then about what social innovation is as I understand it. And this is only my thoughts. This isn't, I want to take my minister's hat off for a minute, but just looking at sort of my experiences with it. And I'm hoping in a way that it'll be a bit provocative and give you some permission to be a bit provocative, because if this isn't an open and dynamic discussion, then it'll fail to be what it needs to be, which is, dare I say, innovative. I also want to thank Ilse Trinick and the folks at MaRS, and Alison Hewitt and the people at SiG. And I want to thank George Ross and the people in the Ministry of Research and Innovation and those teams for their extraordinary work. And Ralph and Ian in my office. Ian is away sick today, which seemed to be cruel punishment because he has worked on this till about midnight every night for the last month. How do you start to define social innovation? I do think it's definable. I think it is actually something more than simply knowing it when you see it. And it isn't a well-constructed idea yet. And I think you construct the idea of social innovation from the evidence of it. And I think if we have one task today, all of you have had experience with it. All of you can bring today to the discussion to create a very dynamic platform for change in public policy and change in our community through your life's experience by sharing your evidence of social innovation. And out of that evidence, we should be able to define the characteristics of social innovation that will lead us to a working definition, some common words and some common language that is so important to binding us together so we can work more effectively as a team. We know it has a face. People like Jane Jacobs and David PICO, I think we'd probably all recognize as people who talked about the big and did the big change that our friend Rick Young talked about earlier. People who looked at the jobs that cities do, the activities and functions that go on, the complexity of those things, and the complex ecology of change in a community, how it's impacted, and the conditions that promote it and the conditions that diminish it, and how each of us, whether we're in the private, public, or not-for-profit sector, or just as citizens, can impact on those kinds of things. For me, social innovation has to have two very fundamental characteristics. And both those characteristics inherently make it very hard for the public sector to be an important actor in it. One of them is that for the government, it is about creating value and understanding fundamentally the difference between an expenditure and an investment. Probably more important than dividing public expenditures between capital and operating, it is today to understand which dollars going out the door of government impact on the complexity of our economic and social and cultural lives in ways that create return, build capacity, and create additional value, and indeed, and quite specifically, create a return of revenue back to government. Because you have to treat those in different ways. That happens on different scales with different types of investments, and it happens over different time frames. And that allows different toolkits and different financing mechanisms to be created that have to be unique to the nature of the expenditure, the outcomes it's trying to achieve, and the scale of value. And sometimes that revenue from government creates a revenue stream for the private sector. In those cases, one should look to the private sector, which is the beneficiary of, as it is of many government incentives, expenditures, infrastructure, and programs, to bear some of the cost because they are benefiting directly from the value of the revenue. Sometimes it enables the not-for-profit sector, in anything from housing to anti-poverty work, to healthcare, to environmental work, to develop revenue and capacity. And then we can look to the not-for-profit sector to use those tools to create its own capacity to sustain its ability to change. And then there's things that are expenditures. There's so many things that we have a public sector to do, to share the wealth, to simply do things that the private and not-for-profit sector can simply not do. And we pay taxes to ensure that we live in a civil and equal and generous society. And we have to identify those because those are, in our healthcare with an aging population, there are simply going to be greater responsibilities for government to ensure that we live in a just and equitable and humane and generous society. And that is a currency, if I can use the word, of government, is based on its ethics. It's also, as Rick was saying, social innovation is not linear. It is, and we live in the complexity of an ecology. We're not talking about making a list here. We're talking about understanding the ecology of our economy, our society, our values, how we think about ourselves, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about others, and often sometimes rising above sometimes our diminished expectations of what's possible to actually define how we achieve the impossible or what is the seeming impossible. Social innovation is a clarion call to rise to that level of action, to reach to the stars, to inspire and to excite, not simply look for the lowest common denominator and do what can be practically done. Innovation requires thinking outside the norm, which is the other challenge for government, because government has a very hard time doing anything but managing costs. Our budgets are based on weighing how many dollars are going out the door and not looking at the complexity of what those dollars do. Hard to calculate return on investment, and hard to bring it back home as a sustainable funding force. And social innovation at its very, very core, and one of the papers that's on the site that we'll be talking about a little bit later is Tom Porter's paper on shared value, which is really focused on the private sector's capacity to create higher yields, to create social value, to create other outcomes as a core central activity of a business rather than the peripheral activity of corporate social responsibility to meet some public good as a sidebar activity for a corporation, but to actually understand that today that this has to be a core function of every business, and the failure to create shared value is the failure to complete the civility and the conditions to sustain that business. And he gives the example of Starbucks now shifting from simply redistributing coffee revenues to actually creating clean water in communities, to actually creating higher coffee bean yield, to actually educating the children of coffee workers, to actually creating social capacity. And they have found that has been the biggest accelerator of their supply chains. Now, I don't want to suggest that we have to have such utilitarian, selfish market outcomes, but at the same time, we have to realize the value of shared value of creating innovation and social innovation as a fundamental activity. But it imagines higher risk. We're asking leaders in the public sector to do something that they have been well trained not to do for a very long time. I was involved with the creativity in the federal public service, a Center for Strategic Management of the Federal Public Service. We were meeting next to an inquiry, the Gomery inquiry at the time, and it was interesting because the public servants I was working with, the senior officials, were saying 50 to 60% of their time was doing accountability work. And that the cult of accountability had taken over the creative resources of the public sector federally to a point where they were spending a minority of the time on what their skill sets were. They had no time to be creative and innovative, and that they were now becoming well-trained in Ottawa to do what was predictable and formulaic. It was like Holiday Inn or McDonald's, no surprises. Give the minister the lowest risk scenario and the thing that gave you the lowest risk of any embarrassment. You know, and Rick talked about big ideas and big change. Well, in politics, that often translates into bad press and electoral defeat. No, I'm very serious about that. It takes extraordinary courage to go out there and create change, because to innovate means removing yourself from the tried and true, the stuff that's always worked. It's acknowledging that while something may be working in your closed system in the public sector, it's ceased to have a great deal of value outside in changing people's life. As a matter of fact, you've actually managing no change or managing the status quo, and you are stagnating innovation because you, in the public sector, keep on reinforcing the status quo because you're not accountable for outcome and value. You can demonstrate that you've spent the dollars reasonably well within your budget envelope. Well, the cult of accountability that has taken over the public sector, I think, in Canada is destroying its capacity to innovate. And under Pearson and under many others, we built one of the greatest public policy and innovation organizations in the world that led us to Human Rights Charter and Medicare and amazing social innovation on a grand scale. We have to get back to that. And I think today it involves something more complex in government. And maybe the way out is a broader partnership where we share the political risk. Because maybe indeed social innovators in the not-for-profit and private sector have to play a leadership role today because of the culture of media and because of our values that we used to look to government solely to play before. So the structure of partnerships, which is one of the focus today, is very critical, because it's not just how do we share financial risk to create additional value. It's how do we share decision-making risk and the political risk together, that Ilsa can do things and say things that I can't do, and I can say things and do things that she can't do, and my friend Tom Core at OCE, and my friend Helen Burston as a private citizen, as an activist in the community. All of us can take on roles. My friend Michael Shapcott at the Wellesley Institute can do things that I can't do. But if we have back-channel communications, if we actually form partnerships, we can actually move change, because each of us can be agents for advocating different kinds of ideas. And I only think I have a couple more minutes, right? I don't want to go over my time. But for me in the public sector, I'd like to reach back into something in my past where my sort of experiment with social innovation came out of a crushingly difficult problem. It was one November morning when I woke up and found myself mayor of the city of Winnipeg. I was mixed with joy and pain on that day. I had just taken over the city, which had the worst economy of the 10 largest cities in Canada, had the highest per capita debt of any city in Canada, and had the highest per capita property taxes in the top 3 percentile in the country. Couldn't borrow money, couldn't raise taxes, and we were losing 4,000 people per year. So we were depopulating, and the poverty rates were all-time high, specifically amongst First Nations communities and Métis communities in the urban core. We were building about 14 affordable housing units a year in a city where the waiting lists were around the block. So we tried to take on some of these challenges, and though we didn't call it social innovation, it was at that time that I developed a friendship with people like Jane Jacobs and David Pico and many people, Phil Fontaine, and we looked at value. So we said, we have no money for housing, But we created a land bank. We created tax increment financing. We created tools similar to Section 37. We asked people what their neighborhoods were. They defined their neighborhoods. We looked at all the land that government owned in that. And we created a toolkit with about $2 million in the bank. And within 2 years, the community, not-for-profit and private sector, built about 4,000 affordable housing units. At the same time, Toronto built about 400. We had the challenge of heritage buildings. We created a fiscal tax mechanism that looked at the conditions of the buildings, realized that people were only getting 50 cents out for every dollar. We calculated that if we actually let them write that all off against their taxes over 10 years, we would actually make money at it. But it had to be immediately performance-based. So we saved 36 heritage buildings that were fully used simply through the construct of a marketing mechanism. It didn't work in the first place, so we allowed them to take their tax credit and monetize it, turn it in, part of it into a grant. And we had 36 heritage buildings that came back to life and became the home for large parts of the not-for-profit sector, and play a key role in taking a special effects film industry in downtown Winnipeg from a $10 million industry through a $380 million industry. But we had no money for economic development. We also ended up with $35 million a year more revenue coming out of the historic core of the city, and the vacancy rate dropped from 60% to 10%, way beyond what we thought would happen. So we measured the return on investment of a heritage program. We realized that in those areas that we were doing this housing program, housing values in 2 years went up 43%. People had nest eggs for retirement. These were the kinds of things of trying to calculate that. The hardest part of it was bringing into the public sector what the private and not-for-profit sector understood, which was there was another side to the ledger, that housing wasn't a cost, it was actually an investment that over a reasonable period of time not only paid for itself, it also had collateral benefits of lower crime, higher net personal wealth in low-income neighborhoods, and a series of things, because we looked at the complexity of the ecology of place and shifted from cost-side management in government to return on investment management. And that was the scariest thing. And I took more bullets as mayor and more political criticism for all the failures, because what politicians have to do is shield public servants from the criticism so they have the liberty to create change. I think we have to go beyond that today. I think it's the partnerships they have with you and collective leadership that is necessary to manage the communications, the transformation, and the engagement of citizens sufficiently that we maintain a constituency of a majority of Ontarians for change. And that may be our biggest challenge yet. Thank you so much for giving time today to this important outfit.
All right, one quick question to each of you, and then I'll let you go so that you can be accountable for being in the House like you're supposed to be, as opposed to being here where you really should be. So, we're talking about big change, and we're talking about now in the political world. As an activist your whole life, as a person who's cared about these things, how will you find a way to affect change and still keep the politics in mind? What's the challenge for you?
Well, I think that this is, or let me start, you give me an opportunity, because one thing I was remiss in doing, and I want to do this before I answer the question, is there are a couple of individuals in the audience that I want to identify and ask them to stand up. And one is Yasser Naqvi, the MPP for Ottawa Centre, who's here, who's a great champion for the research and innovation agenda. And I mentioned her name, but I didn't know she was in the audience, Helen Burston, who really is the one responsible for the partnership project and making it the success that it has been so far. Wasn't a delay tactic to getting to allow me to think. But, I think this is one of the few areas where perhaps politics isn't as important as it might be. I believe that there's a great common understanding between or among the individuals in this room and others who aren't here today but are engaged in the issues, whether it's on the innovation side of society or whether it's on the social side of society, that there is a tremendous need out there. I'm overwhelmed, I know Glenn is as well, about the initiatives that are ongoing, the great ideas, conceptualizations that are among us and where this province has great opportunity. And as I mentioned in my remarks, in a large extent, or to a large extent, government's role, I think, is to sometimes to sort of get out of the way. Other times is to catch up. This is a perfect example where, as I just mentioned, there are so many good initiatives out there on social innovation, social enterprise, and many individuals and institutions and organizations that are already involved. So it's given what we're trying to do is build a better, more equitable, sustainable society. That's sort of the foundation of this. And then each one of us and each pillar in that, if you will, or each, whether it's government or non-government or private sector, we need to find our space to help make that happen. And you can, after listening to Glenn and Laurel, I'm sure you'll agree at just how easy it was for the three of us to come together on this issue. I think it was the first time in that three ministers had come to cabinet together to seek cabinet approval on moving forward on some important elements of this agenda. So I would like to believe that this is one area where if we go about it the right way, politics perhaps is much less important than we might think it is.
And I'll just ask, why was it important you did this with two other ministers? You could have, this is research and innovation, you could have just moved along and said, I've got this idea for social innovation. Why did you need to do this as the three of you?
Well, it wasn't just two, it was actually specifically Laurel and Eric. I want to be clear about that. Not that there aren't other wonderful people in cabinet, but I think that when you looked at our experience in the not-for-profit sector, that we, I think, if I could speak for us, kick me if I'm not on page on this, but I think we see the dynamic relationship between civil society and government as effectively needed to change. That you cannot do these things inside government. The complexity that some of you have talked about, that leadership has to move outside of government. Government, well, it has to be activist and it has to be agile. There's a stronger expectation that we live lightly in people's wallets and less instructively in their lives, but engage people as intelligent, thoughtful citizens, not simply consumers and voters. That was a philosophical viewpoint that I think Eric and Laurel and I share, given where we came from outside. I think that is the necessary foundation. It challenges, because the Liberal Party is a big tent, and I don't want to speak partisanly here, but I think within that big tent, we found each other and this idea of social innovation, and with our Premier, who's made innovation the middle word in every sentence in government now, that you had to challenge them. That the welfare state tradition, where I think those of us on the progressive side of politics see as important, created a dependency in the sense that you were dependent on the state for your housing. Well, we now realize, as David Helchansky has pointed out, we have half as many middle-income neighborhoods as we used to have and twice as many low-income neighborhoods. That you actually have to have housing policy that impacts on the middle class, that actually restores home ownership in places like Toronto and Ottawa, because whether or not you own a home is one of the biggest determinants of whether or not you retire in poverty. So that involves a whole lot more opportunity. If you think of it, as Rick was saying, make it big, it's about big systemic change. Look at the impacts on people's net worth. All of a sudden, the economics of housing and investments in housing are positive. If you only look at trying to house the people who are most marginal, you've reduced the problem to a small problem, and the return on investment and the success of social change, of creating net wealth in society and creating more value and repurposing that value to sustain a coherent housing system for the middle and lower income folks, all of a sudden becomes positive and becomes growing your tax base and in fact reducing your tax burden over time. We're not dealing with the problem sufficiently, increases the tax burden of the middle class even more greatly. So it's thinking in larger systems, and I've always found Eric and Laurel and our Premier have tried to create space politically, which is very hard with the media and the world we live in, to have a bigger conversation about more important ideas rather than the stuff that fills up the front page of papers, which tends to be small ideas.
All right, I'm going to thank Minister Hoskins, who has to get going, and I'd like you to thank him as well for being here.